I'm happy to introduce our next speaker. Dave has kind of, I feel like, been everywhere now. Like he started, started on the operational side. I forgot if it's like security, fraud, or both.
Security.
Yeah, security side, and then Splunk boss of the SOC. I think he's one of the founders. And then I think Google Chronicle got renamed to SecOps, I want to say.
Yeah.
And then nowadays, and I guess he likes scale, so he jumped from Google to Databricks so he gets to be the eyes in a lot of interesting rooms. So with that, let's turn over to Dave.
Thanks, Leo. Cool. All right, sorry, a little bit of AV problems there. So yeah, Dave Herrald, I'm super happy to be here. Thanks, Leo, for having me. Yeah, this is a topic that I used to talk about a lot, and I didn't anticipate talking about it a lot more. But everything that's kind of old is new again. I think over the past little while. So we'll jump in here. The reason I'm here is because, well, let me jump here for a second. The reason I'm here, this felt like a couple years ago to me, but it was really actually less than a year ago, about 10 months ago. I woke up and this was in my feed. So I don't know if any of you have seen this, but this is Leo and team, basically unleashing investigative agents against an old data set from about 10 years ago that I happened to help create. So it caught my eye because I helped with Boss of the SOC a number of years ago, and they keep doing this. This is from this week, and they're doing just more and more stuff. And my friends from Boss of the SOC are like, hey, I saw that you're speaking at this guy's conference. Like, what is the thing? What is the deal with this thing? And I said, well, near as I can tell, they're super serious people. They do real research, like 364 days a year, and then one day a year they create these crazy ass AI generated thumbnails. But seriously, when I first saw that, I reached out to Leo and the team and just kind of talked about, hey, what were they doing with the data set, and how could we help and collaborate? So yeah, I'll just jump to but like kind of who are these people, and then the thing with Boss of the SOC, it's an investigative blue team capture the flag. It's been around for a long time. Splunk still runs it, and it's super successful, right? Tom Schmidt over there still runs it, but I'm going to talk about some open source data sets that came out of that a number of years ago. This also, for me, was sort of an existential moment, like last April, where I think we all kind of have this moment, especially as a security person, where you realize that something that you thought was probably not going to be disrupted by AI absolutely is being disrupted by AI. And for me, it was sort of this sort of intuitive investigative flow that we attribute to security investigators, and that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to take this maybe a little more seriously. So yeah, I think investigation is one of those things that is art and science, and I think increasingly, if you put it in the frame of terminology that we use today, it's taste, right? It's human taste. So understanding, like, how do I, when do I sort of make a pivot? When do I dive deep on something? When do I formulate a new hypothesis? When do I continue to follow a certain hypothesis? And it can be learned. And this is something that we did in Boss of the SOC a lot. There's a lot of different CTFs that focus on a lot of different things. Ours was focused very much on investigative craft, right? Like, how do you actually do a good investigation? And if you participate in this CTF, like it would teach you, right, from question to question, like how to progress through an investigation. So it can be taught. This is actually a picture that we took at one of those events. It's like tens of thousands of people have gone through this event. Like I said, still going on. I think they did version 10 last year. the open source data sets that Leo's posting all of his bombastic social media about, those were from the years in 2016 through 2018, right? Goes back a long way, a bunch of us listed there that contributed to that. There's some open source data sets, Creative Commons 0, so these are things that people can use. There's data sets, and then there's also questions, and there's answers, and there's hints and things like that. The thing that caught my eye was Leo said, hey, here's a data set, and here's questions, and if I just reframe that a little bit, it becomes something that I can use for eval, for agents. So I can try an agent, go through this CTF, see how it performs. Okay, I can tweak something, can go through the CTF, see if it gets better, and you can start to hill climb and do eval. And for me, it actually says right there under the data sets project, you know, we wanted to train security professionals. That's why we open source this data, but we also wanted to fuel research, right? And I would say that there wasn't that much research that I'm aware of that happened because of this data. Lots of people used it to learn. Maybe a couple researchers, I think, you know, Ram from Microsoft used it a long time ago. But, you know, I was really excited. So that was a cool thing for us. And one thing, though, is that, and this is what everybody, myself included, right, when they see, hey, you know, we're using this for agent training. The problem is that the data is so old now and so well known that it's in every training model. The question, this is from Saturday night. So there's this guy, James, who helped us build these. And one of the questions in the Boss of the Sock data set was, what's James's favorite Coldplay song? Google knows, Gemini knows, Claude and ChatGPT all know the answer to this question, right? Because it's been out there. And so this is sort of one thing when I was talking to Leo about this is like, how do you deal with this? And they're actually dealing with it, you know, well, right? They're understanding, hey, this is something that we have to take into account. But, you know, it got me thinking that, you know, we should maybe create some new versions of this. And so, oh yeah, there's some, there's a few photos. I didn't want to put too many Splunk photos in here because I don't work at Splunk anymore. So these are photos of my own house where we generated a lot of this data. There's my little lab under the steps and a much younger, some of my colleagues there. But, you know, when we create these data sets, one thing, and Leo pointed this out, and we've had like tens of thousands of people point this out to us, is it was the realism that we, and the sort of the care that we took to make the data sets extremely realistic, you know, using real malware, creating like very believable characters, having interplay between the characters, actually making sure that everything lined up from a timing perspective took a very long time. Person months to kind of go through all these things. So I thought, hey, you know, things that I used to think took us a long time and that were a lot of toil and very tedious now become much easier, right? And so how could we maybe create some more of these data sets for that would be open and free, and but we're sort of built to that same high level of that kind of high bar of quality. So yeah. Now we'll talk about new data. And so I was like, hey, you know, I think we can do this pretty quickly. So I spun up something called Bad Actors Framework. It's Claude Code, with the idea being that you know, when we would build these things, it really was like it was like film, like making a film. Honestly, it was like creating characters, creating a story, creating all these storylines. And so and this is all stuff that I created. I started this on the 10th of March and finished it about the 18th of March. Again, this is something that back in the day we would spend like a long time building these months and months. So, you know, create some fictional folks there. Operation Yarn Ball. So this is something that also was really important to us when we created the bots data sets, and that was important for people that went through it and said, hey, we're learning a lot from this. We would always create a realistic but fictional adversary group. And we would take it as an opportunity to teach like CTI fundamentals, like, hey, there's there's this adversary group, here's a diamond model that shows like who they target, what techniques they use, what industries they target, that sort of thing. And a lot of times we actually created malware that sort of that was new, that sort of looked like it would come from one of these folks. So we have the attacker Yarnball, and I gave it a little bit of a nudge. I wanted a developer to be using OpenClaw, and to have his OpenClaw get prompt injected from some malicious content that he got in an email message, right? So I thought that would be cool, something timely, and so kind of prompted it. And yeah, I'll talk about the timeline of creating this in a second, but this is like 15-minute increments, right? Like, okay, prompt it before I go to bed, prompt it when I wake up in the morning, maybe, between a meeting here and there, but, really, really sort of minimal kind of work on my part. One thing that I will point out from a few years ago was this talk, or this paper from some folks at Stanford that created this world called Smallville. And so I don't know if anybody's seen this paper or not. It's really great. And basically they created this little world. They created spaces in there, and then they unleashed, I think, 25 agents to just and they gave them little personas, and the agents just started kind of wandering around, and they started doing all these things like meeting each other, talking to each other. I think they invited each other to coffee and have dates and things like that. And I remember reading this paper a couple of years ago, and I was like, that would, I think we could actually use that to like accelerate like the way we used to do these things, right? And it turns out you can. In the sort of data set that I created, we had these characters over here, they were like, opening PRs and kind of pinging each other on the status of PRs, and like, talking about, expenses and costs and things like that. And I didn't tell it to do any of that, right? It just said, hey, you're an IT manager, you're a finance person, you work at Pause, right? And so that was cool to see that come to life. And then, a big part of these things is just like standing up the infrastructure. And that was actually one of the things that I always did, because I had that silly stack of computers in my basement, right? And so it takes forever, right? It just takes a long time to stand these things up, even if you can try and use automation, but you just tell Claude, hey, here's my Proxmox stack, which is my open source hypervisor. All these people that are in this MD file, they need computers. And it went and said, okay, cool. I'll use Packer, and I'll set those up, and I'll join them all to the domain, and I'll even connect them up to Cribble and S3 and send your data into Databricks. I work at Databricks, and Databricks is a great place to send security data. So like, if anybody's interested in that, come by and see our booth tomorrow. This was like literally took minutes, and it was like, okay, this is something that took me months and months. I won't say maybe it didn't take me months, but maybe felt like it. And there's like it's like super aware of like, hey, you told me to put that on a local disk, but don't you know you have, Dave, don't you know you have a NFS, NAS or something? Like, it's telling me all about my lab. I finally stopped and said, will you just please fix everything in my computer lab and document it? And it was like, yeah, you have a bad disk on that, and I'll log into your Unify network and fix that, document it, whatever. So I got a nicely documented lab out of the deal. This is sort of the agentic decision execution loop that it came up with, which is really, really cool. This is sort of this is the flow of how it said, okay, based on this scenario, we want to execute this. We want to execute this attack. Here's these personas. Here's how we're going to do that. And basically built all this for me with agentic engineering, if you will, vibe coding, and it worked really great. It cost me this part actually used the Claude SDK. Or excuse me, the Claude API, I should say. And so not my Claude Max subscription. So I think I spent like $80, just kind of like getting all this, going and working, which I thought was pretty great. Found lots of things all across the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I think there's a little bit that's not on the screen there, but when we go and look at the telemetry, which is the important thing, right? Like, it's there. There's stories to be told. There's connections. There's proper sort of parent-child relationships, and these are all things that are very difficult to get in good, like in security telemetry. It's easy to kind of replay telemetry, but it's hard to get all the events to sort of match up so that stands up to like investigative scrutiny, which is the whole point of these things. So I was really pleased with that. Created lots of lots of different kind of data sources, a lot of Zeek in there. So I was happy to hear the Core Light folks talking today. Big fan. And so, you know, just in kind of some of these things, the compromised machine and all that, I would probably go back and add a few more data sources to this if I was making it something that I was, you know, not just trying to get done for a conference talk, but I was pretty happy with that, with very minimal sort of input. And the question, you know, I said, hey, now you have to write investigative questions about this, and it went through, and it did a great job. Actually, it did a bad job, and there was a bunch of questions that were either unanswerable, or they weren't sort of discrete answers, right? They were story problems, if you will, or essay questions, and not sort of a single answer, which is not really what we're going for. So we did a few rounds on that, but ultimately came up with some really great questions that I was really happy with. I won't dive into all those questions. This is a timeline, so I just had Claude, hey, go back and tell me how long it took to build this data set. And it said, hey, you know, you started, see if this works. I don't know if that'll work or not. Guess it won't work, but started on March 10th, kind of finished on like March 18th, again, not wall clock time, just sort of working, you know, from you know, 15-minute increments, if you will. Yeah, super happy with it. And now there's a few new things if anybody wants to check them out. There's a new data set, so you can go check out that data. It's called the pause scenario. It's in Echo Lake, is just this place in Colorado where I live. But there's a replay engine that'll replay that data to kind of wherever you want it to be. There's data sets. I also had it create like just a gigantic amount of of atomic red team tests, because I was doing that for something else. So if anybody finds that useful, and the bad actor stuff with all the questions and a lot of the diagrams and stuff is all there as well. And I think that's all I have to say. And I appreciate everybody coming, and I appreciate Leo for resurrecting the open source boss of the SOC data.
Yeah, I should be saying thanking you. Like you gave a lot of fun to our team.
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, if anybody, it will be at the conference tomorrow. Databricks. We'll have a keynote tomorrow morning, and we'll have a booth for the first time in our history of Databricks. So we'd love to see everybody there.
So while I definitely have questions, as I'm probably out of our team, I'd say is probably looking at this way more than we should. I don't know if anyone in the audience any questions for Dave on what they're doing here.
Yeah, I don't have these sort of like these sort of like big important topics that you all seem to work on all day around, you know, the future and governance of AI and security. But yeah, this is more of a fun talk.
I mean, this kind of looks like a digital twin of investigations. Have you thought about it from that concept?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of organizations use their own investigative data to do these kinds of things. I think one thing that we always like to do was say, hey, this is something that's completely synthetic, yet it's extremely realistic, and make it available, to kind of freely available, because it's really difficult, in my opinion and in my experience, it's like very difficult to take actual incident data from an organization and scrub it, because it's hard to know that you've done the whole thing, you know, that you've done a complete job. And so, you know, yes, I think that that model is really good, especially for internal usage, like thinking of a digital twin, or, you know, taking you know, some investigation, but like substituting in maybe a different attack or something at a certain point. Like, I think those are things that are like very straightforward and easy to do with the tooling that we have available today. And I also recognize, like, this is just like everybody has their moment of like, yeah, like this, I just did something useful with Claude Code, and it's maybe not earth shattering to to everybody in the room, but it's certainly a lot of fun. I think it's just one small useful use case, I hope.
Okay, one more back here.
Yeah, I'm curious, where are the gaps as far as teaching investigation, or insofar as what would make this more relevant in industry, or yeah?
Yeah, the gaps, I think the gaps are like availability of data, and like I think maybe one of the gaps is like I don't think you could ever do boss of the SOC and not run into the fact that data is like from the old data sets from 8 years ago. It's everywhere. So I think availability of new data, maybe, and that's kind of the reason that I did this. I also think that maybe people they maybe don't train on like really good investigative techniques. So something like a Chris Sanders, level of like thinking about how do I, how do I really think about investigation? Like, what are the actual sort of like cognitive processes that a person goes through when they're doing that? I think those things are not probably emphasized enough. But also, I think a lot of this is going to be done by agents, and we need a lot of good data probably to help train those agents. So,
actually, yeah, maybe you just.
One question I have is we experiment with a lot of open source data sets, and one thing that we see recurring is that it's not realistic in the sense that the majority of the data that you see as a SOC is mostly benign behavior, right? It's all your, and a small part of it is very much your attack. And so, as like a lab, like our biggest problem generating any data set is matching that scale. Like being able to generate these massive amounts of normal looking data is really hard, especially because there's a lot of privacy issues. So like, have you guys thought about that? Like,
yeah. Well, and sorry, I have my AV issues, so I didn't maybe mention everything, but like background data generation, super hard to do. Sounds so simple, very, very hard to do. The way we used to do it, one of the things that contributed to that time is we would have people sit at a VM and act like, Mallory from finance or whatever, and just like surf around for 3 hours, right? And then we would replay that data. Now I could have agents, take on that persona and generate background data. And I plan to do that, actually. Yeah, it's a great point.
And maybe a selfish one for my part while Don sets up here. So maybe a perspective is, I don't know if you thought about regenerative. And so the context is, as often when you're doing evals, one of the rules of evals is you're supposed to throw them out, right? Like they go stale, as you pointed out. And what we've found, for example, success elsewhere is we'll actually find new threats online, and we'll actually we'll have fresh evals generated when we're doing certain ones. And so I'm kind of curious, like from a regenerative view of the evals, have you been thinking about like, when like new threats come to retrain it, or like, how are you thinking about regeneration?
Yeah, I feel like I have this superpower now with that. So like now I could just say like, hey, because there's a bunch of stuff in there that I could actually speed up by like making it a skill and make it really fast, and just be like, hey, go read the news about, go read the news about the Striker attack, and help me sort of emulate that, right? And I'm pretty confident now that I can like crank those out pretty fast. And so yeah, I think that's the key, is just probably just more, but keeping the quality at a level that's high enough, right? That it's